Today on the show, I have author Tim Marczenko. Tim has written 2 books, Disembodied Voices, True Accounts of Hidden Beings, and Gone Cold, Death and Disappearances in the Northwoods. I wanted Tim on the show to talk about his second book, Gone Cold, which looks at missing persons cases in my hometown province of Ontario. Gone Cold is incredibly gripping and exhaustively researched. I was delighted that Tim wanted to come on the show to discuss his book, the writing process, and some of the cases he spent so much time researching. You can find both of Tim's books on Amazon in print and audio format. I've linked them in the description. You can also find Tim on Facebook and Instagram, which I've also linked in the description. Here's my conversation with Tim. About these missing persons cases, like what was the origin? Take us back to the first book. Like what was the spark that made you go, you know what, I'm gonna write a book about this?
Yeah, that's like a much longer, over decades kind of answer. But I've always been interested in these types of stories, these mysterious disappearances. I should probably state right away that I don't cover or investigate cases that are obviously criminal. I don't go near those. I'm not a police officer. I don't touch homicides or things like that. I'm only drawn to cases that are mysterious with very little details. Always been interested in those. They always just kind of got under my skin and kind of left like this haunting feeling with me, even as a young boy. And I would be drawn to, books and TV shows that cover these topics. And I just kind of carried that with me my whole life, and it grew with me. And when I was older, I would follow these stories in like the newspapers and, clip them out, and just really attracted to these mysteries. They kind of just never left my mind, probably because it seems like they could happen to anyone, and that was terrifying for me, that anyone could just vanish, it seemed.
We're going to talk about Gone Cold in a minute, but I'm curious. I've read Gone Cold, and thank you for the copy of that. And we're going to talk about Disembodied Voices, your first book, True Accounts of Hidden Being. Was there a case that kind of sparked all of this? Like, was there something in particular that was like, oh, I've really got to expand on this and I've got to jump into researching it?
So with the Disembodied Voices, it's a very different book. It's supernatural folklore type based book about these forest entities or disembodied voices that kind of lure people away from safety, typically into the forest or the wilderness area. And there's many different answers that folklore provides about what happens next. And I developed this theory about how the voice works in this book. And it's basically the lure, which is it kind of gets your attention, these voices. The trap kind of holds you and pulls you in, and then the lost is the third step in the kind of 3-tiered formula. And the lost is basically people who followed these voices and don't come back. So I'd always been interested in missing persons cases, but in this book I kind of just added a few of those missing persons cases towards the end, just to kind of beef up the end of that theory. Like what does that look like when people follow that voice? Like what happens next? Well, if no one's there to see them follow the voice, then they do vanish. There is no evidence of where they went or where they were last seen. And so I did have research material from the first book. Actually, I had a lot left over, and it really kind of just built up. And I just kept researching. Like once the book was done, I just kept digging and digging and digging. And I was like, I should really tackle this missing person problem and see if there's, just explore all like the theories and, everything that's, all consuming about this topic, right?
Yeah, that's incredible. And your description of your first book there makes me even more curious to check it out. It sounds absolutely fascinating. It sounds like you really have a penchant for exploring unique theories, which we'll get into with the second book in a little bit. But I first wanted to kind of start with one of the things I really appreciated about Gone Cold is that you covered missing persons cases that I had never heard of. I mean, I'm from Ontario. I live in BC now, but I'd never heard of any of the cases that you put in the book. And then even when I Googled the names of some of them, like just the starting point to try and get any information about some of these people, like there was hardly anything. So I'm curious, like, I guess it's kind of a two-part question, but like what made you want to cover unpopularized missing persons cases? And I guess like what kind of a challenge was that to try and get some of the research for this book? Because like I said, when I Googled these, I was like, wow, there's not a whole lot here to go on.
Yeah, it was extremely challenging, and even today I'm still having difficulties finding any more information about these cases. Like the research process is ongoing because it's just something that you don't stop. But I wanted to focus on the lesser known cases because, they were the most mysterious and they lacked details. Now, to me, if I were to disappear and there was one sentence blurb written about me on the police websites and on the internet, that would not be good enough for me. I would not feel that's not worth it. I feel like these people deserve more. Their life cannot be summed up in one sentence, especially because, it's a very vague sentence. Maybe it says, so-and-so was last seen here. If you have any information, call this number. And, these that's pretty much what some of these blurbs are. And it really didn't sit well with me that that's all we knew. Maybe like what kind of pants they had on, what color of jacket. But there really wasn't much info. And I wanted to kind of flesh out these cases and trying to fill in those gaps that, police and like early investigators had missed, because it seemed like no one was really fighting for these cases anymore. They're not like the big, media stories. They're not spotlighted in the media because, some of these are like 60 years old. No one knows about them, basically. They don't make big headlines. Even back in the day when they first disappeared, some of these people didn't even get, in the newspapers. There's some cases I investigated, and I didn't find one article about a search or, something like that. And that was just crazy to me that there was no paper trail or anything. So, yeah, I just wanted to focus on those lesser known cases to kind of beef them up and hopefully give them a fighting chance so they would not be kind of forgotten.
Yeah, and kudos to you because I think it's super, super important to bring these cases to the forefront and give them the due diligence. And I think accurately, I think I would call these historical cases as well. In that, like you said, some of them are 50, 60 years gone by, and I think as we know, a lot of us know. I'm sure you have too. The older some of these cases get, the more they seem lost to the past. I'm just curious, like, what was your research methodology like? Were you in archives? Was it, I know in the book you talk about trying to file FOI requests. Like, can you tell me a little bit about what that was like? Because again, these cases are very historical, so I imagine you really had to dig to try and find that information.
Yeah, I looked everywhere, under every rock and tree, you could say. Like, I started with any official documents I could find, any police reports, things like that. I scoured the archives of Ontario, the archives of Canada, any media or newspaper databases as well. Now, newspapers aren't as accurate, obviously, as official documents, but they do give kind of anchor points for things such as dates and those involved. So those, while need to be cross-checked, they can be very valuable. And then the main thing I was after was any kind of primary source. So if there was a surviving member of the search party, surviving family member that was there, or if the investigating officer was still alive, which, in some cases was a long shot, that's the data I really wanted. I wanted accurate, if these stories were going to be told one final time, in full, I wanted the story to be as accurate as possible. And that's what I was after. So with the freedom of information requests, I mean, that's a good place to start because it kind of tells you what's available, and how much the police or any government body knows. You know, you don't have to just submit to police. You can submit to, natural resources or things like that. But there's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of privacy concerns that stand in your way of finding the truth. And that was, years of roadblocks and, appeals for me, things like that. And pretty much had to plead my case multiple times for every individual that I was investigating. And, the censors will hide behind these, certain rules, but without context of the actual case, it's very hard to justify these rules in the Privacy Act. So that was very difficult to get through. And a lot of the times they would say they couldn't find the records. The records didn't exist, things like that. And then I would submit, 3 years later and say, oh, we did find some records. We'll give you partial records. So it was very inconsistent. That was probably one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, I really identified with your frustration about FOIs. That's something that I've done in the past for research, and it can be very, very frustrating. And I think a lot of people don't understand how long of a process it can be. Like, I remember it taking like up to a year to get documents, from a government body. So kudos to you for sticking with it. Yeah, and you can definitely you get a sense of the frustration, especially through the audiobook, with you narrating it. It was something that you really had to kind of be tenacious with. I guess, what was that like overall, like writing the book? Was it emotionally draining? I mean, it sounded like it took a long time. Like, what was the personal toll on you?
Yeah, it was very emotionally draining. It was days, nights, and weekends. Keep in mind, I was getting home from like a full day's work, and then I was getting on the phone and interviewing family members and like police officers, and you're kind of like reliving that trauma they're reliving that trauma through you, and it takes a lot out of you. And you may not realize it at the time. I don't think it hit me until like a couple years into the research that I was like just emotionally exhausted, but I was so like driven, like I wanted to do my best for these people who I've never met. And that may sound like kind of silly and kind of, what's the point? But like, I don't know. I just kept putting myself in their shoes. And for me, that power, I think power comes from perspective. So if you put yourself in the perspective of a missing person or that person's family, it really gives you this like endless drive, and you want to do everything you can, even though it's an uphill battle, you just like, with that perspective gives you that strength to just like push through it. And there were times where it's like, well, I feel bad because like maybe I'm upsetting people, I'm like digging up this grief again or whatever, which in some cases was not true. But then I was like, well, I'm not doing it for them. I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it for the person who didn't come home, who can't fight, who doesn't have a voice. And that's kind of what kept me going, even though it kind of, I had like insomnia for a while, and it really was exhausting. But I wanted to just be accurate. My name was on the book, so it had to be my best effort. And I think I did that. I think I put more than 5 years into this book, and it's still ongoing. I'm still fighting for these people. I have an adjudication appeal coming up for one of these missing people, and I'm still going. It still hasn't left me. So
yeah, that's incredible, and it really, really shows the amount of effort and diligence you've put into it. So yeah, it's absolutely incredible, and I don't think I could have said it any better about what can drive some of us to want to cover these cases. You know, it's giving a voice to the people who don't have one. So that was
Yeah.
incredibly well said.
Yeah,
Let's
exactly right. It was like these people can't fight for themselves, so and no one else will. And a lot of people, it was very strange to me because when you're calling a family member, you expect them to answer the phone and they're like, bawling their eyes out or things like that because it's like a trauma, right? It's a loss to them. But some family members, it's not like that because a lot of these cases are so old that these people have to. It's just they accept it as part of their lives. But for me, it seems fresh, right? So it's so strange. But like you kind of have to transform yourself, come at it objectively, but also do your best for that person. I just wanted to say one thing I forgot to mention. Another reason why I focused on the cases that had very little information was because recently the existence of these individuals have been called into question. And that's a fascinating thing because there's very little evidence or data of these people and their disappearances. People are actually starting to believe that these people have been made up. And to me, that is terrifying to have some of these people, probably in 50 years, be rumors, basically. They could be internet rumors. And, that's kind of where the data is sitting right now. And so I kind of wanted to give them a fighting chance in that way and give them a whole chapter in the book to kind of prove that they existed and kind of tell their story.
That's terrifying that people
Yeah.
will be trying to erase people's identities based on lack of information about someone's disappearance. These are real people. Like I said, not that I at all questioned that when I was listening to the book, but I Googled and did some of my own research because I was curious, and I was like, clearly these are people. Like there is facts to trace back to and accounts to be like, yeah, this person existed. That's a good segue into the content of the book. We're going to do our best to talk about some of it without spoiling too much, so that people can go and actually read it or listen to it. I've covered people missing in the outdoors a couple of times on the podcast, or more than a few times. Did a whole series about someone who vanished while hiking a through trail, and there's a lot of theories that come up when you're talking about people going missing in the woods or the outdoors. And one thing I really enjoyed about your perspective was that you kind of talked about some of the misconceptions to why people go missing outdoors. And I think one of the big ones is a lot of people assume, well, maybe some sort of animal attack was involved. That seems to be a popular theory amongst people who go missing. Can you talk a little bit about the misconceptions you came across and what it was like to kind of dissect them and go through them?
Yeah, sure. So, as you said, animal attacks, predators, that is probably the number one theory you hear about when discussing wilderness disappearances. I mean, when someone's attacked by an animal, there's evidence of it. There's a scuffle, there's drag marks, there's claw marks, there's blood, there's hair, there's clothing. You're going to know. I mean, when you go on day hikes and you see a pile of fur, there was an attack there. Maybe a fox got a rabbit. There's evidence of attacks and predation. So it's very hard to hide an animal attack. The cases in this book and the cases I research, when these people go missing and a search follows, there is no trace of this human being ever to be found. Nothing is found. No articles of clothing, no blood, no nothing. So if these people were attacked by an animal, they would definitely find something. But that's not the case here. Even a full-grown bear cannot eat a human being in one sitting. And some of these searches happen pretty quickly after the person disappears. It's very hard to believe in the animal attack theory. Another theory is suicide. But if someone's, going to kill themselves, if someone's dead, their body's not going to move. You're going to find them. I thought that was interesting because searchers are very good at what they do. They know how to beat the bush. And some of these, search and rescue reports, they're arm's length apart. They're not going to miss a dead person in the forest, either on or off trail. Some of the other ones, drowning. Yeah. A lot of these people the cases I investigate were people familiar with the area. They're aware of the bodies of water and other hazards in their environment. Some of these people go missing in their own backyard. So the drowning theory does come up. But, when speaking to coroners and reading those textbooks and things like that, typically when a body enters the water, it will, once it eventually sinks, it will stay at the bottom where it went in, unless there's some kind of underground strong current. So these, waterways are pretty heavily searched, dragged. Usually divers go into the water. So, but no bodies have been found. So we would find evidence of any kind of drowning or things like that.
Yeah, that's really, really well said. There's a handful of cases in the book, but I wanted to kind of just touch on two that I found particularly fascinating and that I think you found particularly fascinating as well, just based on your enthusiasm that comes through. The first one is the disappearance of Vital Vachon, and I believe he was last seen in a lumber camp, but as you point out, there's not much known beyond that about his disappearance. I'm wondering, can you tell me, kind of give us an overview about that case, and then what were some of the challenges you faced trying to even get information about his disappearance?
Yeah, absolutely. So Vital Vachon was of French descent. He worked in a lumber camp in Lucas Township, which is west of Timmins, Ontario. This would be a very wooded area, far off the highway. He was working in the lumber camp, and this happened May 1st, 1973. He was an experienced bushworker, and Vachon went into town, took a taxi into town to buy a new chainsaw to bring back to the main lumber camp. He was seen buying the chainsaw, returning to the camp, dropping it off, getting in a taxi, and getting dropped off at a friend's trailer in the evening, around I think it was around 6:30. Vachon and his friend were just drinking in the lumber camp, and he was reported to leave at 8:15 that same night. His bachelor camp was about, I think it was a mile further down the bush, a mile and a quarter to his bachelor camp. This would have been a path that he walked every day. So Vachon walked back to his lumber camp that evening. It wasn't until May 7th that the foreman of the operation realized that Vachon had not been to work for a number of days and visited his lumber camp. There was no sign of Vachon at his bachelor camp, and at that point the police were notified that Vital Vachon was missing. The case was investigated by, just to get the officer's name, it was, Constable William Archibald of the OPP. He went to the site and interviewed the witnesses, the foreman, the property owner, and the individuals that were last seen with Vachon to create a full report. And as thorough search as possible at the time was done, according to the police report. Now, in northern Ontario, early May, there definitely would have been snow on the ground. Winter lasts a little bit longer in the north. So I understand that he may have had trouble doing the search just because of the winter conditions. But Archibald came back with another officer, and the area was searched in May, June, and July, and back again in August. Vachon was not reported to be drunk or stumbling when he left for his bachelor camp that night. Police seem to hatch a theory that he may have wandered off in the wrong direction, possibly fell in a river, or was drunk, even though there was no evidence of him being drunk. I filed for the police report in 2017, and I was denied for various privacy reasons. It's actually a long list of reasons, probably 2 pages of reasons. So at that point, I did my own digging elsewhere. Went to the archives, tried newspapers, tried to look for relatives, but I couldn't find a thing on Vachon, and that was very odd. So at that point, I kind of just had to put it on the back burner, work on something else, and then on a hunch, I decided I would resubmit in 2019. To my surprise, the police did grant me partial access to the report, which I thought was strange because surely the same privacy exemptions would apply. But this is just the kind of inconsistency with the act. But anyway, I was able to confirm with the police report that police did continue to do searches in the area, did hire a helicopter, but there was no mention of any organized search and rescue or police dogs. I don't know. They continue kind of blamed it on the conditions, but I know search and rescue are very good at what they do and can search for a missing person in the dead of winter. So surely they could search in early May, but for whatever reason, this was not done. I also learned that police didn't halt operations from the lumber camp. So traffic was able to go, in and out of the area. They were still cutting trees. It was open to locals and hunters. To me, I think this would have hindered the investigation because you're having people walking in and out, destroying pathways, possibly trampling over evidence without notifying them that, hey, we have a missing man in the bush. Look out for these articles of clothing, things like that. So that was very odd to me. This is the only case I investigated where, in a small window of about 6 months, police made a motion to close the case. And all the missing persons investigations I've researched, that never, ever happens. Even the ones from, the 50s, it's always open. The police will always leave it open. But this is the one case that they wanted to hurriedly close it, and I don't really know why they wanted to do that, especially because not a single trace of Vachon has ever been found. Now, this case was really weird to me.
It was super bizarre when I was listening to it as well. Do you have any theories on what happened? Do you lean towards anything, or is it just completely baffling?
There's nothing I'm leaning to, and that's just because I can't form an opinion just because there's a lack of data. The police did form an opinion, which I can't understand how they could have. The quote from the investigator, Sergeant Rose, was, "Vachon became lost while intoxicated and is dead." So that's weird because there's no evidence that he was intoxicated. They also don't know which day he went missing. Vachon was reported last seen on May 1st. He was reported missing to police on May 7th. That's 7 days. If he's drunk on May 1st, there's no way he wouldn't be intoxicated if he went missing, May 4th or May 7th. So without a body, they can't prove he's intoxicated. And there's no evidence. They didn't find anything. So there's no evidence to support that he's dead. So I don't know where they, it's possible they just didn't share all the data. But if he's dead, then the case would be closed. But as of this day, the case remains open. The motion to close the case, it was signed off on. And then, years later, it was not closed. It remains open. So I don't know why it remains open. It is very weird, but yeah, we still have no idea.
Another captivating case from the book is the disappearance of Sander Lingman. I was really drawn to this one as well, and there's quite a bit to dissect with this case as well. But I'm wondering, can you give us a bit of an overview and maybe tell the listeners what drew you to this case in the first place?
Yeah, Sander was one of those people that just kind of stuck in my head. I would constantly be thinking about a handful of cases every night. They just kind of kept me awake, and Sander was one of them. And I would often, have like nightmares about it, or even just like dream of the location, just like what it looks like, and just picture being there and what it was, what surrounded me. Sander was also my age, around my age when he went missing. So I kind of related to him, and I wanted to tell his story the best as I could, and hopefully, do the man some justice. So Sander was an experienced bushworker. He was a trapper. He was a prospector. He was the type of person that could survive out there. He had a lifetime of experience in the bush, and was living in, remote Ontario, a town called Nakina. Beautiful place, surrounded with lakes, great fishing, just perfect for an outdoorsman's paradise, basically. So on October 30th, 1960, Sander Lingman was hired by KRNO Mining to retag mining claims in the Grip Lake area. That's like way in the middle of nowhere with no road access. The only way into Grip Lake is by foot or canoe or float plane. It's very remote, very wild. So every year, prospectors need to restake their claims, or else they're forfeit to and open to other prospectors. Prospecting and mining in Northern Ontario is a very competitive industry. So KRNO hired Lingman, who had been to the area before, to restake the claims for them. KRNO accessed the lake by helicopter, which would have been weird in those days, 1960. Usually was accessed by float plane. And he was on site in Grip Lake with his brother Wendell, Vincent Feely, who was one of the owners of the company, Tom Church, and a few other members, a cook, and probably a helicopter mechanic. Wendell and Sander left the bush camp at 11:15 in the morning on November 1st. They planned to restake claims and meet back at camp at 5 p.m. They go their separate way, and 5 o'clock rolls around, and Sander does not return. The crew gets antsy, a little bit worried, because November, the night is closing in quickly. But they're not that worried because, as I said, Sander is a very experienced bushman. He has a sack of food with him. He has a compass. He has matches. He can probably make it out. Maybe he's just a little detained. After 5 o'clock, he doesn't show up, and Wendell runs into the bush with the gas lamp to look for his brother. He comes back an hour or so later because it's starting to snow and the weather is turning bad, with no signs of his brother. From that point on, they turn the helicopter on and run it every 2 hours to give Sander some bearing to follow out in case he got turned around in the storm. But Sander does not come out. The next morning, they flew the helicopter to Auden to report Lingman missing, and the police, Constable William Jack Hayes of the OPP flew in to investigate. From that point on, actually the first day, there was 19 volunteers that searched the bush. They were all flown in, and no trace of Sander was found. Jack Hayes had to be flown in every day while Sander's family members stayed on site overnight and searched pretty much all day for their relative. That was 1960, and not a single trace of Sandra Lingman has ever been found. Not his clothing, not his compass, not anything. This is a man that should not have disappeared, and if something happened, would have known what to do.
Again, do you have any theories you're leaning towards, or is it one of those that you just don't have enough information or data?
Well, I was able to uncover a lot of data with this, including the officer's field notes and some of the police report. Actually, this is one of the cases I'm appealing now, and I've actually been waiting for that for over a year. So I'm hoping to hear back from the adjudication judge about that. The family has a theory. I was able to interview some family members, and actually family members of the investigating officer, William Jack Hayes. The family believes that Sandra Lingman was murdered by his employers from KRNO. Now, the owners of KRNO do come with a bit of a shady past. Having said that, they have never been convicted of a murder or were not known murderers. They did get in legal trouble, and I covered that in the book. But there's no evidence of a murder. And it's funny, when people talk about, missing persons cold cases, people think that they're, usually all homicides. But in every case in this book, there is zero evidence of a homicide in any of these cases. In fact, there's more evidence of there not being a homicide in these cases. So the family leans towards a murder. I personally, I don't know. There's just not enough evidence to put the blame on someone. I don't know. The lake was searched thoroughly. It's a small lake too. Like, it's not even, a few kilometers, maybe long. And they dragged the lake with irons and searched with canoes and everything. They searched for days, and then the family went back in 1961 in the spring to search again, and still nothing was found. It's just baffling.
Yeah, both Vital and Sanders' disappearances are absolutely baffling. And it's also incredibly impressive how much effort and time you've put into researching them. So I think, people listening, go get the book and read about these cases, because they're incredibly important and forgotten. And so I think it's really important that people know about them. Something else you bring up in the book that I thought was incredibly fascinating, and kind of like you said in our back and forth while we were setting this interview up, we could probably spend a whole episode of a podcast talking about this, but I want to touch briefly before we close out on something you bring up, this concept in the book called the forbidden theory. I want to be careful here because I don't want to spoil too much for the listener, because I think it would be in their best interest to read about it. But can you kind of give me an overview of this theory, give the listener a sense of what it is?
So, yeah, this was a tough one. I battled with this one for a while, because when you're writing a book like this, you're kind of dividing your audience. And I kind of touched on it earlier. When you're talking about missing person cold cases, there's half of your audience that says, okay, these are, homicides, these are cold cases, this is a true crime book. And then you have the other half who say, this isn't true crime, this is, paranormal, this is something else going on, this is a mystery, this is, supernatural, some would say sometimes, So you're splitting into two camps, and I'm kind of straddling that line, and it was very difficult. You can't please everyone. And when I was doing the chapters on each individual, I decided not to put any of the theories that are often discussed in those chapters, just to kind of keep them whole and as a dedication to that person. And then I wanted to do its own chapter about the forbidden theories that are sometimes associated with missing persons cases. anything from environmental theories to, far out supernatural theories to folklore, things like that, things that, the police will not entertain. But, you often hear this stuff on like podcasts or like TV shows. They touch on all the theories that, pop up. So this chapter is dedicated to those. There's a lot in that chapter. There's something for everyone if you have an open mind. And, and that's the thing. In the absence of evidence of all these theories, including homicide, I believe all theories should be addressed. Until we know all the details of a disappearance, we can't and shouldn't confidently eliminate anything. Because what you're doing is you're closing doors on possible answers, answers that we may not comprehend, until, 50 years down the road. We need to remain open until we have all the data. So I just wanted to put everything on the table. So, there's natural threats out there, such as muskeg, which is muskeg is like a quicksand-like ground, basically, terrain. It covers 1.2 million kilometers squared of Canada, and it's partially decayed vegetation and like a soupy mix of water that can suck anything in, basically. It's been known to suck in tractors, bulldozers. Some of those things are 66,000 pounds, and they can swallow them whole. Can swallow moose. In the 1800s, when they were laying down train tracks, I found some old journals where some train engines were actually swallowed into the muskeg. So that was one fascinating theory. If it can swallow a train, it can swallow a human. One of my personal favorites, and I was surprised that no one really touched on this, was the idea of spontaneous human combustion in the wild. Now, for people who don't know what that is, it's where the human body can, without warning, burst into flames without a known burn agent. Now, scientists say it could be something wrong with the body's thermogenesis or with the hypothalamus gland, which regulates body temperature. And if these things go haywire, that any person at any time could turn into a fireball from within, and it's localized within the person. So that would mean the environment around it would not be affected or singed by the blaze. Now, the temperature of human combustion is equivalent to a minimum of 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 uninterrupted hours. And that's double of what a cremation chamber is. Spontaneous human combustion is known to happen within minutes, so it doesn't actually take 12 hours. But within minutes, you can be reduced to ashes, and that would certainly, cause a person to leave no trace in the woods. That's one of my, the creepiest one, because, it's a rare phenomenon. There's no doubt about it. It's rare, but those cases are well documented, usually happening within people's homes. But if they can happen in homes, they can happen to someone who's, in the bush, staking claims, picking berries, whatever, things like that. And then you go on to some of the folklore things. I'm really interested in the indigenous folklore from all across Canada, actually. Something called the Little People of the Mountain, which are fairy-like tricksters that are known to tip the boats of canoeists, drowning them. These beings were said to steal the fish from the nets of the Ojibwe, and they are depicted in ochre paintings on the side of cliffs and in rock crevices. Actually, there's a place called Fairy Point that has over 100 of these pictographs. So I thought when I came across folklore like that, I found it really interesting because it kind of directly correlates to people that go missing in terms of geography, but also some of these legends where we have Indigenous people saying that these beings are capable of taking people away.
It's a fascinating chapter, and the entire book is incredible. So I want to thank you for not only writing the book and sharing it with me, but coming on the show to talk about it. And I really hope the listeners listening pick it up. There's going to be a link in the description where you can get it. So please do. And Tim, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
The pleasure's mine. Thank you so much for having me on and for giving these people some space to be remembered and to be discussed and talked about. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to my interview with Tim. You can check out links to his social media and his books, including Gone Cold, in the description. If you enjoyed this episode and want to show appreciation, you can support me by buying a coffee or becoming a Patreon member. The Patreon is only $5 a month, where you can enjoy ad-free episodes, exclusive content, and early access to all new episodes of the podcast. Both Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon are linked in the description. You can also support the podcast by leaving a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Follow the Missing and Unexplained podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for updates and new content. Thanks for listening and supporting the pod. I'll catch you soon.